Technically speaking, this car over my shoulder shouldn't exist. It's the new Nissan Z, and isn't Nissan supposed to be all about SUVs and electric cars now? Well, yes, but in 2017, a crack team of senior executives at Nissan decided that alongside all of that practical stuff, they wanted to have another roll of the dice on the Z car, a classic recipe. Over 20,000 have been sold here in Australia, nearly 2 million Z cars have been sold globally, and this is the latest in a long line of heritage. And doesn't it look like a heritage product? It's styled to look like a bit of a combination of the original 240Z and also the 300ZX, which is a classic from my childhood in the 90s. Love the way it looks. To keep it affordable at 73 grand, you know, it's not that bad. They have carried over some of the stuff from the old 370Z, but underneath that long bonnet, there is an updated engine, a twin turbo V6 petrol previously seen in stuff like the Infiniti Q60 Red Sport. Now, the program manager of the Nissan Z says that this car is all about being a perfect dance partner. You leave the super grippy stuff to the GTR, which is expected to be renewed soon. The Z is all about emotional driving feel. So does it deliver on that? Well, today's video, we're going to take a drive in the 2023 Nissan Z and find out what this thing is like as a partner on great roads here in Australia. We'll check out the interior and I'll give you my opinion on whether you should get in the queue to buy a Nissan Z. Okay, here we are behind the wheel of the new Z, launching it for the first time. Woo! Loads of torque from the new engine for this car. As I alluded to in the intro, there's a fair few carryover bits in the chassis, and I'll come to what that means for what the Z package is really like in a minute. But first of all, let's talk about the engine, because that's really what this upgrade to Nissan Z car is all about. So if you sort of follow Nissan closely, you might be aware of this engine, but because Infiniti was never big in Australia before it shut up shop, you may not. So it's a 3-litre twin-turbo V6 petrol. It has been used previously in the Japanese market Skyline, which was sold in Australia as the Infiniti Q50 sedan and Q60 coupe. And it makes 298 kilowatts of power and 475 newton meters of torque, which is absolutely plenty. Heaps of thrust. It's the biggest change from the old 370Z, to be completely honest, although Nissan have refined the car in many other ways too. But it's just that it's no longer really like sort of a momentum car. In a lot of ways, the old 370Z felt like a brawnier Toyota 86, dynamically flawed in some ways. The Nismo was over stiff, and of course a 3.7 litre engine over the front axle is fairly heavy, and that's been lightened a little bit here. But it's more the fact that there's just gobs of torque available absolutely everywhere in this car, and it's a nice match, a formidable match, but a nice one to the 6-speed manual transmission, which is already accounting for 70% of orders in Australia. There's 1,200 Australians that have already parted with their cash for a Z. 70% have gone for the manual, but over the life of the car, Nissan's expecting more like 40%. But it's a nice manual. It is related to the old one. We've got a high-performance XZD clutch, and the whole thing feels pretty serious and muscular. Certainly not dainty, certainly not like a Mazda MX-5, which also has a really great manual and a great shift. It's sort of designed very consciously to be a heavier duty feeling manual here. So it's a bit of a workout actually shifting the Z. And you don't really have to anymore because there's so much torque, but you want to because it feels good. It snickets into the next gate really nicely. But if you don't want to do any of this stuff, there is a 9-speed torque converter automatic transmission that's available too. But given how this car is really the epitome of late internal combustion, don't do that. Go for the manual. Even if you can't drive manual that well, you can drive this car fine, because again, with so much torque on offer, it's really hard to stall. So this wouldn't be a bad way to teach yourself manual. Now the engine is very serviceable. It sounds better. It's got a nicer exhaust note than the previous 3.7, which is really grainy actually. Said that at the time. But there's just an additional layer of sheen and polish on engines that are available in some of this car's key rivals, and I'm mainly talking about the BMW M2 and M240i, which have two slightly different engines, and of course the Toyota Supra, which runs BMW's cluster architecture platform and Bavaria's B58 engine, which is a near perfect inline 6-cylinder engine from a drivability perspective. The Z goes really hard and goes well, but the B58 just has an additional level of slickness, but it's also a car in either the M240 or the Supra, which is 20 grand more than this performance bargain. Heaps of power for your money out of the Z. Nissan does make a good, durable engine, and you can get a manual here. There is that new manual Supra, however, as well. Now, in terms of ride and handling, we are sitting on similar underpinnings to the previous car, a lot of carryover stuff, but Nissan have sort of tickled all of the control surfaces, and there's a lot of goodness in the package remaining, including the steering, which is really lovely steering actually. Single mode steering, you don't get to play with any of that stuff, and that's fine because there's one good steering rate, and if you talk to vehicle engineers, they'll often tell you they don't actually like having to put lots of drive modes and steering settings into a car because it distracts them from being able to settle on just one good setting, and that's what the Z has. And the ride is really good too. We've got a multi-link independent rear suspension, double wishbone at the front, so quite sophisticated, big fat 19-inch wheels and tyres, but the car has a really high level of compliance, so nothing like the old 370Z Nismo then, which couldn't keep its ass on the deck, but the Z has this real inherent suppleness and compliance to it, which is quite lovely. It is very noisy inside though, lots of road noise, you're probably picking up some of that. Some people would consider that sporty, it's probably just a little bit too loud for my tastes, but the Supra is just as bad and worse because it's got lots of wind noise from around its mirrors as well, which this car doesn't have, which is great. Brake feels good, that's been changed to actually replicate a bit more the GTR. But the GTR is a car which the Z very deliberately doesn't try to be, because the point of this vehicle, as Tamura-san says, is to be a dance partner. It's not to be a sort of charging ahead total beast with 600 horsepower and four-wheel drive, because Nissan has the R35 GTR for that purpose and the forthcoming R36. So the Z car is allowed to be lighter, more agile, and a little bit more fun ultimately to drive. It's rear-wheel drive only, no all-wheel drive available, manual transmission. All of this is sounding pretty good to us. So yeah, I mean, if you can kind of get over the fact that it's not an all-new car, because it's really expensive and pretty much impossible to build all-new sports cars anymore if you're not a giant in the field like Porsche really. If you can get over that and just enjoy this car for the nice, relatively analog twin-turbo rear drive tourer / sports car that it is, then you really like it, and I actually think it's good value. Now onto stuff like safety. We've got adaptive cruise, it's got lane departure warning, no sophisticated lane keeping, which does get a little bit tiresome because there's a bit of sort of there's real quickness in the steering, which a lot of people are going to love, but it does mean that you can kind of find yourself twitching down the highway quite a lot, so no lane keep. We do have blind spot monitoring and stuff like that. They're not the main parts of a sports car. The main parts of a sports car are the ability to just roll down the gears, plant the boot, and just feel a genuine connection with the machine, and I think the Z does a really good job of that.
So what about the interior on the new Nissan Z? Well, it's not just functional, it's actually a really nice place to spend time. And one interesting thing about this car is that it is $73,000, which I'm not going out there to say is cheap, but compared to something like a Toyota Supra or a BMW M240i or something like that, it's actually not that expensive. And I think the interior feels about up to scratch. Now, you don't have to look very far to find the bits from the old 370Z. I mean, these door cards are very familiar and they've been around since 2008. The grab to open the door, the sort of air vent thing here, which doesn't match very well with the center air vents, that's all from the previous car, so that looks old and dated. But everything in front of you on the dashboard looks great. Starting with this steering wheel, very similar steering wheel to the R32 Nissan GTR, which apparently customers loved. 80% of the customers kept the steering wheel on the car without changing it to something else. And so that's why this car has this wheel, and it's a round steering wheel. Thank God for that. With grips for your thumbs, it feels good in the hand, it looks good. Now Nissan are particularly proud of the 12-inch TFT screen that sits behind the steering wheel. It's got a cool layout. It was partially designed by one of Nissan's Super GT500 drivers in Japan. So you can see your oil temperature, oil pressure, diff oil, water temperature, and a boost gauge right here on one screen. But if you don't like that, you can make it sort of traditional looking twin dials as well. It's quite customizable. Now down here, only an 8-inch touchscreen, and it looks quite small. You've got these big piano black bezels either side. Not sure about that. It looks like you should be able to get a 12-inch screen in there, so maybe that'll be for the facelift of the car. No satellite navigation. That's weird, but you do get Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, and really that's what most people use, of course. And lastly, a word on the seats. These are really, really chunky seats. Not everyone's going to like them, particularly because the bolstering next to your butt is really extreme. You kind of feel like elevated up off the seat. I don't mind it. It's just that you would want to sit in the seats, I think, before you committed to make sure that this shape is going to suit you. We've got some electric adjustment, some manual adjustment. The driving position's nice and low. You look out over these throwback analog gauges. Everything falls to hand nicely. Okay, you notice the old stalks, definitely. I've got the windscreen wipers going now. But all in all, it's a pleasant interior, premium materials, good driving position, the tech works, and that's exactly what you'd want from a sports car. This car isn't about practicality, but you do have to be able to do some basic stuff with a modern vehicle, and that's what you can do with the boot of the Nissan Z. 240 litres, that's really small. You can get a couple of carry-on suitcases in here. You can get your gym bag in here. Oddly, there's a child seat top tether point for some reason. There isn't a spare wheel under the boot floor though. That's where the Bose subwoofer is, and a goo kit for filling holes in the wide tyres. At the start of this video, I asked 2 questions about the new Z. Is it a great dance partner, as Nissan says it is? And secondly, should you get in the queue and buy one? And the answer to both of those questions is hell yeah. This kind of recipe is just not gonna last much longer. Manual gearbox, twin turbo V6 petrol, rear wheel drive, 2 seats. It's not a pragmatic car, it's not an SUV, it's not an EV, and it looks like this, really cool. Now, I don't think the Nissan Z is quite as slick and silky to drive as the straight 6 BMW/Toyota Supra. That is a truly great 2-seat sports car, and this one is nipping right at its heels dynamically. But I think the beauty that a lot of people will get is that this is fully Nissan's own creation. It's 9/10 of that vehicle's dynamics, and it's 20 grand cheaper than the Supra, or Zupra, however you prefer to think about that car. So yeah, this makes sense to me. It's my kind of car, really like it, not a recipe that will last forever, but 1,200 Australians have already put their money down for the car. And that means wait times are into the mid-2023 zone, so I wouldn't hang around much longer if you want a vehicle like this. Leave me a comment down below, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, and as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.